Just before this video gets started, I wanted to make one quick clarification about what we will be talking about today. If you've been watching my channel for a little while, you'll know about the proposal that's been made by Elisa Siragusa, and a member of the Italian Parliament, who is making some proposals in regards to Italian citizenship by descent, and it actually ends up going a little bit further beyond that. And so this week I wanted to refer to that and talk about that a little bit more, because she has just made a new post on her Facebook, and a lot of you have been asking me about this and asking if there's been any updates, what's going on, what's the situation. So that's what we're going to talk about this week. In this video, I will share some of my own thoughts, as well as talk to an Italian lawyer from a legal perspective and find out what this individual sees as a lawyer. If you watch the Italian Citizenship podcast that I'm a part of, you will recognize this person, Marco Permunian, an Italian attorney who is very familiar with the subject of Italian citizenship, especially Italian citizenship by descent. And also, really, at this point, in my opinion, just to preface this, I can't say that I really think that there is much to worry about now. And if there is going to be anything to worry about, I would say it would be at a very far date from now, a very long time from now, not necessarily so far in the future. But even if this proposal were to catch any steam and to get into the parliament somehow, what I've been told by Marco and his team is that what the situation would be is that it would take 600 to 700 days just for it to get passed. So even if it were to get any steam at all, which it hasn't so far, the proposal has been made. As far as I understand, it was made in 2019, but it is still yet to come onto the schedule of the Italian Parliament. So at this point, there's a lot of talk, but doesn't seem to be that much beyond it. But I still am troubled by this and disturbed by this proposal.
So what you're telling me is that we have someone born in Italy who's residing abroad and supposed to be representing Italians abroad, fighting against Italians born abroad, but who want to live in Italy. How does this make sense? Hello there, I'm Rafael di Furia, back at it again on another Friday night, and it seems as though somebody has reopened their Facebook page. I'm not saying anything in particular, it just so happens that after my last video on the subjects which Miss Siragusa has spoken about, her Facebook page kind of disappeared for a little while. Maybe just a coincidence, maybe, who knows. But this week, I wanted to talk about another few statements that she has decided to make on Facebook. It is now 5:43 in the morning. I could not sleep tonight. I woke up at about 4 something. And as soon as I woke up, I happened to see that somebody had shared a post on Facebook with me. And it seems as though our friend is back up to some hijinks. And really, before I get too much into this video, I think it's important that we get a legal perspective on this question. Just to kind of jump into this a little bit. I'll be recording that after this, but you'll be seeing it right now. Well, hello there. We are out here with Marco Permunian. Thank you so much, Marco, for taking the time to come speak with us. I wanted to ask Marco to come and talk to us because Marco is actually somebody who really can speak about this subject. And some of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Marco is because, firstly, he's born and raised in Italy, so he's somebody who he knows what life is like here. He understands that. But secondly, more importantly, he is an Italian lawyer with a law degree and a very, very good understanding of Jure Sanguinis and the system surrounding Italian citizenship and how it's acquired. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with Marco, he and I have a podcast together on the subject of Italian citizenship and the subject of Italian real estate over on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/Italian Citizenship Assistance. So firstly, thank you, Marco, for taking the time to come today. So let's start out with the very first beginning part of it from your perspective as an attorney who deals with the subject of Italian citizenship and the acquisition of Italian citizenship through Jure Sanguinis. What is your opinion of what Ms. Siragusa is putting forward?
Ms. Siragusa, she is trying to change the law that regulates the Jure Sanguinis principle. So right now, people can apply for citizenship based on the fact that their citizenship was passed from one generation to another, so from parent to child. and based on that, they can claim citizenship through an ancestor, but not directly through the ancestor. They can claim citizenship through their parent, who became an Italian citizen through their parent, who became an Italian citizen through their parent. So something that Ms. Siragusa is not really understanding, in my opinion, is that people are not really claiming citizenship through a distant ancestor. So they're not claiming citizenship through their great-grandparent or great-great-grandparent. They're claiming citizenship through their parent, who was an Italian citizen because their parent was an Italian citizen because their parent who emigrated from Italy was an Italian citizen.
So I think, just before you continue, I think that's a very important distinction, because from the way that she presents it, she always seems to present in the way that you're getting it from your great-grandfather who came 150 years ago, when that's also very rarely ever the case, that if somebody ever goes all the way back to 1875 or 1861, the first year, that would be really the cutoff date.
So she makes it sound like there is no connection between the applicant and the ancestor who emigrated to Italy. So she's saying because there is no connection between these two people, the applicant shouldn't be allowed to claim citizenship. But like we just explained, there is a transfer of citizenship from one generation to another, which is not being taken into consideration. But anyway, what she's trying to do is she's trying to limit the number of people who can claim citizenship by descent, and like to people born abroad to parents who were born in Italy. So we can talk about why this is like absurd in a second, but what I would like to point out immediately is that even in the unlikely event that the law actually is changed in the future, which I believe will be very unlikely, but even if it does change, in Italy, in the Italian legal system, the law cannot operate retroactively. So it cannot touch the right of someone who now has the right to Italian citizenship to claim Italian citizenship by descent. It could only affect the situation of someone who is born after the law passes. So the law can change, even if in this specific instance, I don't believe it would be fair or even legal to change the law. But the law can change. The law can only affect the situation of someone who is born after the law has passed. So I don't believe that this unlikely change in the law will touch the situation of somebody who's eligible for Italian citizenship now.
But you just said something very interesting, that you don't believe it would actually be legal. Why don't you think it would actually be legal to do so?
So she's going to try to basically make a difference between someone who is born in Italy and someone who's born abroad. And for the people who are born abroad, she's trying to introduce this thing where the person born abroad can only claim Italian citizenship only if their parent were born in Italy. So making a distinction between someone who is living in Italy and someone who's living abroad, when they're both the children or grandchildren of Italian citizens, it's discriminatory. It's against the Italian Constitution. The Italian Constitution says that everybody is equal, and there should be consequently no differences between somebody who is born abroad and somebody who was born in Italy when talking about citizenship by descent. Citizenship is passed the same way, regardless of where you were born. It's the principle of Jure Sanguinis, which says you are an Italian citizen because you were born to an Italian parent, not because you were born in Italy. So what she's trying to do doesn't make any sense.
But then also what I find interesting and troubling is that she very much seems to connect the idea of Jure Sanguinis with jus soli, or other ways of getting citizenship through naturalization. For example, in the post that she just put up most recently, she compared somebody who would have been eligible Jure Sanguinis versus somebody who's been living in Italy and living here since they were 3, but is now currently 20. But somehow that person wouldn't have been a citizen. Later in the video, I'll go into the explanation of why I think it's a little bit ridiculous and actually misleading to an extent. But for a person who would, say, be 20 years old, this is not an uncommon story that a person came to Italy when they were young, but for whatever reason, by the time they're 18 or they're a young adult, that they don't have citizenship here. Do those people actually have a way of getting citizenship? And is she just blowing this out of proportion? Or is there actually something valid that she's pointing towards?
if someone has been living in Italy, even if that person was not born in Italy and was brought here as a minor, but if that person has lived in Italy for a certain number of years, it's fairly easy to apply for Italian citizenship, so through naturalization. So she's really comparing like two completely different situations, and she's trying to undermine the situation of someone who is born abroad and maybe has a lot of connections to Italy. She's making it sound like people who are of Italian descent and reside abroad, they have no connection to Italy because they descend from a very distant ancestor. But as you said in many of your videos, like including in your specific case, there are people that are very connected to Italy, even if they have not been in Italy for a long time, or even if they've just visited Italy in the recent years.
Well, I mean, this was also my situation where we've spoken about this. Like, even though before I had come to Italy, I had been given all of these stories and given this passion handed down to me about this country, for this motherland that I had never known. I've spoken about this in my videos before. And so this was something that I couldn't escape growing up. This was just, I very remember clearly sitting on my grandfather's lap, even from the time barely while I was still walking, and him telling me about what the situation was. And again, this is something I talk about later in the video. But there's this aspect that those of us who are born abroad and have this ability, or even the inability sometimes, because not all people who are born abroad that are of Italian descent are in fact eligible or can prove that they're eligible, even if it may be a pretty decent percentage. But getting back to Ms. Siragusa and what she's talking about, you were saying to me earlier, because we talked about this a little bit briefly, that some of what she's proposing is actually extremely restrictive. I don't know if you want to really, how much you want to go into that, but I think it might be worthwhile talking about just briefly.
Yeah, and just to your point very quickly, like we can talk about like how important is Italy for the communities of people of Italian descent residing abroad. But the point here is that what she's trying to do, it's not possible, it's not legal. So to answer your questions, she's trying to say that only people who are the children of people born in Italy can claim Italian citizenship by descent. So only if you are someone who is born abroad, but only if your parents were born in Italy, then you can claim your right to Italian citizenship by descent. So that would exclude like the people who have Italian born grandparents, which, like we explained previously in the video, it's not possible to do. It's a limitation that doesn't make any sense legally speaking.
And so under what you're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, you've already mentioned this twice, I believe, but from just to clarify it, what Ms. Siragusa is actually proposing is not making generational limits of like the grandparents or great-grandparents. She's actually talking about if the requirement is in fact that your parents had to have been born in Italy, or if that's what I'm understanding correctly, that means that only the child of an Italian citizen can actually go forward and get Italian citizenship, and not, say, the grandparent, or sorry, the grandchild or the great-grandchild like we see today.
That is correct, yes. And what she's proposing is not only related to Jure Sanguinis, but she's trying to also limit the ability to obtain Italian citizenship through marriage. So she's saying that only couples who reside in Italy, only for a couple who resides in Italy, the non-Italian spouse can apply for Italian citizenship through the marriage.
So if they're living in, say, the USA, Canada, Brazil, or whatever, the non-Italian spouse then in that case wouldn't have the same ability to get Italian citizenship like they would now.
Exactly, and they would be able to apply for Italian citizenship only if they relocate to Italy and if they spend 2 years in Italy.
So from this, I can see where she's coming from, and it's something that I don't inherently disagree with. Just unfortunately, because of how the system has been abused, I can see why someone would want to put that into effect. However, that would make me then concerned that could also be potentially going against the Italian constitution of protecting a couple's rights to be together, so that if they if, for example, there's an emergency like we've had this year, and they need to be in Italy, for example, I can imagine that could create the situation for one part of the couple to not be allowed to enter into Italy. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but
no, yeah, some people could say it's highly discriminatory against those couples who have decided to reside abroad in the country of origin of the non-Italian spouse.
Because sometimes that may not even be an option. That just like how my ancestors, when they left the country, they didn't leave because they wanted to go on this beautiful vacation or this wonderful world trip. It's because sometimes it's necessary to live in a different location because of the circumstances that you live under. So just before we wrap up this explanation from a legal standpoint and get back to the rest of the video where I talk about things more from a perspective of somebody who has gone through the process and from my perspective, is there anything that you would like to finish off from your legal professional perspective?
Yes, it would be advisable that if they're really considering moving forward with this proposal, and I just wanted to clarify quickly that this is just a proposal that has not yet been put on the calendar of the parliament. So as of right now, the parliament is not even going to discuss this proposal. So this is like very much up in the air. So we should probably clarify that at the beginning, but it's just a mere proposal that has been made by a couple of members of the parliament.
So at this point, it's not even something that's on the schedule of the parliament for them to even talk about.
Exactly. So there is nothing, like there's even more like nothing that people should be concerned about at this point in time. But
so I'm sorry, but this almost makes it sound as though, I mean, she's blowing a lot of steam, but maybe there's not actually anything really behind it.
Of course. It could be never discussed by the parliament. So, and even if it were discussed by the parliament has the ability to make changes to the law, which is what the parliament is there for. Like there is a member of the parliament who drafts a proposal, which then can be and should be changed by the parliament if it's unconstitutional, if it's not in compliance with the principles that regulates the Italian legal system. So, a lot of things could happen. This is like very much up in the air, but it's good that we talk about it. But if they do want to move forward with this proposal, assuming it will not be changed, which is very unlikely, they should at least like put in the proposal clearly that this should apply only to people who were born after this law will potentially pass.
Also, Marco, just thank you so much again for taking the time. I know you have a very busy schedule, and I really do appreciate you coming to talk about this from your professional standpoint as an Italian lawyer who deals with the subject on a very regular basis. Social distancing, so back to the studio. And thank you so much, Marco, for taking the time out of your busy schedule for this. I know you have a lot on your plate and are always constantly busy, so I really do appreciate it. Also, if anybody is curious to hear more from Marco about the Italian citizenship process, of course, we do have a podcast that we do here on YouTube, a video podcast on the channel youtube.com/Italian Citizenship Assistance, where you can find the Italian Citizenship Podcast as well as the Italian Real Estate Podcast. So let's read this. I'm just going to read the English translation. The Italian, it actually did a pretty fair job in my opinion. Of course, my Italian is not perfect, but I understand it well enough to know when there are things that seem a little funky. Oh, but by the way, just before we get into this, if you do look at her Facebook page, it just happens to be interesting that she lists her hometown as London. Somehow this almost seems, maybe it's just me, but almost slightly hypocritical. I mean, I would think that if you're trying to protect Italian citizenship for people who are living in Italy, that you would want to actually live in Italy yourself. Maybe that's just me. Looks like I'm going to have to put my glasses back on. Just as I take them off, I'm going to have to put them back on again. Anyway, so from her post, it says several months have passed since the hearings on the citizenship reform PDL ended. During those hearings, we listened to many testimonies of girls and boys who grew up in Italy, but who do still struggle to become citizens of the country. Boys and girls, I think in this case, does not refer to young children as it would in English, but actually young men and women. From my knowledge of Italian, sometimes you can use boys and girls for people who we in English wouldn't call boys and girls at that younger age. The current law is in fact at 2 speeds. It gives citizenship to all descendants of Italian immigrants without generational limits, even if they have lived abroad for 150 years. I looked at the Italian for this wording, and it seems to say the same wording as it does in English. I mean, I don't know. I don't know of anybody who's lived abroad, let alone lived for 150 years. So I don't think we have to worry about 150-year-olds voting in Italian elections. Maybe I'm wrong. They do say the people up near Garda do live exceptionally long. But 150 years? I don't know about that. Anyway, let's get back into this. If she had said, I think she was intending, of course, to say that even if the person had left Italy 150 years ago, if we're going to say 150 years, the vast majority of people making a claim for Italian citizenship don't go back that far. Yes, in theory, it's possible, but most people don't go back that far. But the thing is also, this is an oversimplification of the matter because it doesn't give citizenship to all descendants of Italian immigrants, not immigrants. No, not all, because there are a lot that are not eligible. And the thing is, they don't just happen to have citizenship. Yes, under Italian law, it recognizes them as being born as Italian citizens from birth. However, the vast majority of people born abroad of Italian descent don't have the ability to exercise any right to vote in Italy because they haven't been recognized as Italian citizens to begin with. So it seems as though there's a bit of inflating going on here and building this up to be a bigger issue than what it really is. Because if we're talking about the people who are of Italian descent, who have elected to move forward and try to gain their recognition as an Italian citizen, we're talking about a fraction of a minority. Because, okay, fine. If we have like a whole circle like this, and in that circle we have people who are of Italian descent and eligible for Italian citizenship by descent, I would say it would probably be a good portion of the circle. But the people actually who know about this being possible is a small fraction of that. And then once you go to the people who know about it, then the people who are actually looking into it, that's a smaller fraction there. But then the people who know about it, who are looking into it and have started moving forward with it, that's an even smaller fraction. But the people who have known about it, started looking into it, moved forward with it, and actually gone through all the steps necessary to gain recognition of Italian citizenship, this is a minority of a minority of a minority of a minority of people. This is a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of people. There's no way to know definitely what that number is. But if you think about it, the average Italian-American, Italian person of descent residing abroad doesn't necessarily have this on their mind. Yes, more people are finding out about this, but the amount of people who are actually moving forward with it, I would argue, is minuscule. And this is because of having been around the system more than half of my life, and then also on top having been in contact with a huge number of people over the past few years since I started this project here on YouTube talking about this subject and life abroad and living in Italy to begin with, which, by the way, if you would like to see more content like this about moving to Italy, Italian dual citizenship, and living life abroad, make sure that you are subscribed with that notification bell turned on. And of course, thank you to those of you who are allowing me to continue to be able to talk about these subjects, such as this one, such an important subject to many of us. Really thank you for allowing me to continue with this. But anyway, let me get back to what I was talking about here. So just based on the wording of this, both in Italian and English, not every 150-year-old who's been residing abroad are worried about their citizenship here. But anyway, moving on to where the limits are for the current Italian citizenship situation. The limits obtaining citizenship to children who grew up in Italy, who attended our schools, and who live here and want to live here. Parliament has a duty to address this issue, which has been in the drawer for too long now. Then she has an infographic that she's also included here, which you can tell there are certain biases based on the names chosen here. Anyway, we'll get into that in 1 second, but limits on obtaining citizenship to children who grew up in Italy and who attend our schools and who live here and want to live here. As far as I'm aware, that yes, there are limits in this situation. However, if a child's parents were to get Italian citizenship while they are a minor, then that would automatically make them a citizen. And then also, if you're talking about the situation of a person who came to Italy as a refugee or stateless, then this becomes a different situation. And there are rules that do speed up the ability for that person to have citizenship. But let's just go into this infographic here. Alejandro, like I said, this seems to have a certain type of bias here. Alejandro is 20 years old, born and raised, and I'm translating here, so forgive my speed on this one, but born and raised and lives abroad. And then you have Anita. I'm not going to say anything. It's not an uncommon name here, but maybe I'm wrong, but I feel as though a lot of the people that she would be arguing about that would be in this position might not have that name. So there seems to be a little bit of a bias here. Anyway, that's just my opinion. She was born and her parents were born abroad, but they immigrated to Italy properly when she was 3 years old. So, okay, fine, that's fair. This is a situation that is not uncommon. So that if a person came here legally, that they came here properly, then this is not something that I would even say there should be an issue with either. Because if we're talking about that she's been here since she was 3, that means that if her parents were legally residing in Italy, that by the time she was about 13, they would have been eligible for gaining Italian citizenship, or at least applying for Italian citizenship at the time when she was 13. So if they had received their citizenship, say by the time, if it was the maximum of 4 years of processing, by the time she's 17, she would still be a citizen. So I'm not saying anybody should be blamed in this situation, but my question would be, why didn't her parents start applying for Italian citizenship and leave her in the position that she's in? But for people who are orphans, who didn't have parents, or the parents who were unknown, they do have a right to citizenship. So there seems to be an argument here that, in my understanding, doesn't totally make sense here. Anyway, getting back to Mr. Alejandro, his parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were all born and raised abroad. Fine. Again, with the Italian law, the way that it works and the way that it's written is that a person in this situation, even if we're talking about great-great-grandparents or great-great-great-grandparents, potentially could have Italian citizenship. But going back to Anita, she was just raised in Italy, not born in Italy. But so I would say that is a fair point. And if somebody makes an argument that I think does raise a fair point, I have no issue to agree with that. But if someone starts arguing points that I see as absurd, then I don't have an issue to point that out either. I will say that, do I think that there is a disconnection from a person who was born and raised abroad from the country of Italy? I can't say for sure that that actually would happen because of how strong the Italian identity lasts, and would argue that there is a cultural connection regardless, even if it's only very minor by the 3rd or 4th generation. For most of us that have grown up abroad, people will grow up telling you you're Italian, or your family will be very proud of that fact and practice certain traditions that your family would have had back in their home country. They may have been changed over time, but the origin is still nonetheless the same. And so I would say, if we're talking about that a person raised in Italy has a better knowledge of the culture as it is today, I would say yes. However, a person born abroad still would have that connection, it might not be that connection of knowing the Italian pop culture of today, which, okay, big deal that a person can know who sings what song and the words to Amore e Capoeira. Like, for a person to have that kind of a connection to the country, even people in this country, they don't have that. Fine, okay, maybe that's a bad example, but I think my point kind of gets across here, that knowing Italian pop culture and knowing the Italy of today, yes, it is important on a certain level. However, there are people even in this country that don't have that connection. And if we're talking about people who have a connection to the country, then we have to talk about the whole country, because there are parts of the country where, in fact, people themselves will say they are not Italian. They are insert region here and insert demonym here. They are Sicilian. They are South Tyrolean. They are from this area. They are from that area. Their regional identity and even language that they speak. Many people would be offended if you called them Italian. Many people would be offended if you called the language that they speak Italian, because it ends up becoming a dialect or even a completely separate language to begin with. Even when I lived in Alto Adige, I had quite a few students who had no desire for a connection with Italy. They didn't care that they had an Italian passport. They didn't care about speaking Italian, nor did they want to learn the language. Even I knew a number of kids who actually completely hated the language. And so, yes, I realize that Alto Adige is in a particular position, but if you're arguing about that all citizens in Italy should be treated fairly and equally, then you can't start talking about that because a person was raised here, that all of a sudden they have a connection to the country, because that is definitely not always the case. Anyway, getting back to the infographic from Miss Siragusa. Alejandro has a far removed grandparent from Italy, Luigi, that left in 1861. That is really the cutoff point. And out of the people that I've been in contact, the actual number of people that do go that far back, that is really pushing it. That is really trying to prove a point that doesn't really make your point or exist here. You're using an extreme here that is a minority of a minority of a minority of a minority of another minority. Like, it's building it down to like really just a few people that probably exist here. Anyway, getting back to Anita, she has gone to school here and is now in the University of Milan. Great, good for her. I don't see a problem with that. And getting back to Alejandro, is an Italian citizen through Jure Sanguinis, and Anita still doesn't have Italian citizenship, but Alejandro can vote in Italy, and where his family hasn't lived for 150 years. But in the case of Anita, she can't vote in Italy, in the country where she lives and where she was raised. I think this is really an oversimplification of the situation, and I think it is very sad to see that a person who is in the position that they are supposed to protect Italians who are abroad would attack them in such a way like this. I can't understand why a person would be in a position to supposedly represent and protect a certain group of people and their rights, why they would be attacking them in this way. This is really sad to see. Yes, there are some points to be made that if a person has been abroad for so long, that why should they have the right to be in Italy? But at the same time, I have to argue that there are so many of us that would have otherwise been born here in Italy if our parents had remained here, and that have chosen to stay here in Italy, to have chosen to make our lives here in Italy. And of course, like I said last time, and like I've said in other situations, in other videos, I believe, I don't understand why the attack on Jure Sanguinis always comes along with this discussion about allowing people who were raised here to get citizenship, because I'm not necessarily inherently against that. If a person followed the rules and actually came to live in Italy, has never been in trouble with the law, has never committed crimes, then okay. If a person has checked all those boxes, then why not? But the thing is, for me, I didn't choose to have this in my family background. What makes up a part of me? This is where my family comes from. I can't help that. Yes, I have personally chosen to come back here, because if you had told me that my family would have stayed here or they would have been abroad, and that I would have said, maybe I wished that they kind of had stayed here to an extent, even though I am grateful that they left to be able to give me and my family the opportunities that we did have and some of the experiences that I've had. I'm very grateful that I had the experience of growing up in the United States and what came along with that. However, I know my life and the lives of my family going all the way back would have been very different. And it's not like my family left Italy because it was just this fun thing to do. No, it was because at the time, it was nearly impossible. Like the stories growing up that I was told about this country and what it was like here and the life here and this passion that was passed down to me, that the water in the area where they came from was so dirty that even the children had to start drinking wine just throughout the day just because the water was so tainted and so dangerous to drink. So literally remaining in the country would have been hazardous and poisonous, at least remaining in the area where they came from. But especially if we're talking about at that time, a southerner coming up to the north, they would have faced more issues then probably than they would have today. Because yes, my family comes from the south of Italy. And for me, getting the recognition of Italian citizenship was for the connection with Italy and being able to get to know Italy better. Yes, of course, it's interesting that as an Italian citizen, you have access to the European Union. But for me, I'm Italian. That Italy may be part of Europe, but I'm Italian. That's my personal feeling. Yes, there are people who I know who have contacted me who are interested in Italian citizenship for moving to Germany or in the past to England and other various countries around Europe. And it's not that I have an issue with that, but I do think that a person, if they have a certain passport, should at least know the country a little bit and should get to have an idea of what things are really like there, what's attached to that, what comes with that. Because on some minor level, that person, when they are abroad, does represent the country in some minor way, even if they're not representing the country on a legal level. But again, this gets into a discussion. And I would actually say that unlimited Jure Sanguinis, I can't say that I'm against it, but I can see the points being made that if you went up to the fourth or fifth generation, or if you make a certain cutoff date by, say, 2050, I would say that's long enough of a time that it gives the majority of people who would have otherwise been interested in it the possibility to do it. However, if there's going to be an update and a cutoff date, the system needs to completely be overhauled because it does not work as it is. Look at South America. Look at the waiting times there. Look at what happened in Los Angeles just a few years ago. Okay, fine, things have come back to almost normal now, but we're not seeing the system getting better. During the lockdowns, I do know some people who did actually apply for their recognition of citizenship here in Italy, and their process went a little bit faster because so many fewer people were actually making applications, and the workloads were not as much as they were before, because the amount of people coming to Italy and actually trying to do this had dropped significantly. But that still doesn't get rid of the fact that these laws are pre-Italian even. These laws are so Italian that they predate the country itself. It goes all the way back to Roman times, this idea, this concept of citizenship passing down through the bloodline. This is nothing new. And of course, this wasn't created so that Italy could bring people back. However, it has, in my opinion, served a very important function, that there have been so many Italians who were forced to leave the country that it has allowed their children and grandchildren to come and take the place that that person would have had and to be able to contribute to society. Yes, of course, there are other people from other parts of the world who do want to contribute to Italian society, people who grew up here. And I'm not arguing against that inherently. Of course, like I said, if a person comes to the country legally and goes through the proper processes and hasn't committed crimes, then I don't necessarily see a problem there. However, if you're going to argue things the way that Ms. Siragusa has, and actually showing a specific bias against people from a certain part of the world, before she was talking about people in general from the Italian diaspora, but now she has shown a very clear bias against people from the Italian diaspora from Central and South America, which that I think is really a disgusting thing to do. Yes, I will use that kind of language. I think it is really horrific because those people, even if they have mixed blood, are just as Italian as she is. And she's arguing this position while not even living in Italy herself. Because like I said, even a person like Alejandro might not be able to vote in the Italian elections because they haven't gone through the process or know that they were even potentially Italian. And if you're talking about someone who's 20, like realistically, I'm assuming here, a very small number of people, and then the number of 20-year-olds who are politically active in Italy who reside abroad. Yeah, I don't know. Even this last election that we just had, if I'm not mistaken, only 34% of the country turned up. Granted, there were some region-specific elections, but we did have a national referendum. And this is nothing necessarily against the party that she's a part of. I will say that I was someone who was hopeful, very hopeful of that party, and very hopeful that they would actually be able to help the country. But seeing politicians like this pop up from that particular party, I feel as though I'm losing more and more faith as time goes on, especially seeing arguments like this from a seemingly hypocritical standpoint. If someone believes in this so much that a person should have that connection to Italy, then I would see that that person should back up those words and remain in Italy and not represent the people who are living abroad. Because also, I will argue the point, as somebody who left the United States 11 years ago, more than 11 years ago, that you do lose a connection with your original country as time goes on from a cultural level. So I do think that she does have a point there to an extent, that there is a removal generation by generation. But at the heart of it, that person is still retain something from that original country. But if she's going to argue that a person loses the connection over time, I'm not sure how long she's been abroad. I think I may have read something that it could have been 8 years that she's been abroad. Maybe I'm wrong here. But if she's an Italian politician who's resided abroad for so long, who's arguing against the connection that people carry to their country because they live abroad, then why should she be in the position that she's in representing other Italians? Shouldn't it be somebody who believes in Italians being able to hold on to their identity and actually be able to represent people and protect their rights rather than fight against their rights? Shouldn't it be somebody who can actually fight for the rights of their constituents rather than fight against the rights of their constituents? That to me just doesn't seem to be logical. Again, I can understand the position she's coming from, but that doesn't mean I agree with it. I can see where her arguments lie, but I think some of them are absolutely ludicrous. Anyway, thank you again for joining me. A lot of you have been asking if there's been any updates with the situation with this particular politician and her stances on things and what's going on here. And so just happening to see this post, I felt as though I had to keep you guys updated on what's going on. On my Facebook page, I will share the link to this, assuming that she doesn't take her Facebook page down again. I would honestly say maybe it's a little cowardly if you're somebody who is trying to make political statements as a politician to hide what you're saying. You should be able to stand behind what you're saying and argue against anybody that doesn't agree with you. I'm not a politician, though. I'm just an average guy just living life in Italy and actually making a life for myself here in Italy every day. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me for another Friday night. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for liking the video and sharing the videos with your friends and subscribing to the channel. And thank you, huge thank you to those of you who've been helping to make these videos possible through Patreon. As always, your help to make these videos continue is truly appreciated. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael di Furia, and I will see you all next time. Later.